Hi, and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On this episode, I am so honored to bring to you an interview with the award winning trial attorney, Daphne Delvaux, or as some of you may know her, the Mama Attorney. She's the founder of Delvaux Law, which is the nation's first and only law firm devoted to women's rights at work. She's also the creator of the Mama Attorney, which is a platform on a mission to educate mothers on their rights at work, teach them how to advocate for their needs so they can protect their pregnancies, get more time with their kids, get more benefits, and ask for accommodations without sacrificing their career goals. She was raised by a single mom in Belgium, and this led her to want to advocate for and support mothers. She's been recognized as a leader of the women's rights movement by news outlets across the globe, including ABC News, Huffington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and more, and has received the award of Outstanding Trial Lawyer for winning an equal pay trial, among others. Delvaux is also a mother to two boys, and her passion for women's and mothers' rights has led her to champion women in a myriad of ways outside of her law practice. She's also the co founder of Chamber of Mothers, which is a collective movement to focus America's priorities on mothers' rights. And she is doing a lot of work to help mothers, and you'll hear a lot about that in our interview. And one of the things she's done is to create a membership to her organization, the Liberated Mother Society, which helps moms understand and assert their rights in the workplace, including extended maternity leave, benefits, flexibility, more breaks, protections. And her membership also includes attorney drafted and trusted scripts that you can use in email communications with management or HR, which is so necessary when you are in the throes of whatever you're going through in the reproductive phase. The last thing you need is to figure out how to say what you need to say. It's so time consuming, and I'm really just I love that she offers this as a resource and service to people. Coming in fall 2025, she has a book that is slated to launch. And in our conversation today, we get into lots of really, really important stuff on the myths or misconceptions about maternity rights in the US, how important it is to know your state's rights, how to advocate for your leave, how to announce your pregnancy, and how to return from leave, among other things. It's just so chock full of information that is really needed. And unfortunately, most of us either don't know how to access information or kind of don't even know where to start. So the fact that Daphne is out there championing for mothers and putting this information together is just so vitally important. And I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. So let's meet Daphne. Welcome, Daphne. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on. And I know you have a lot of people who follow you on social media and really, I think, holding on to all of the content that you put out because it's stuff that we don't know and we don't have access to. We don't know the intricacies about leave and law and how it impacts mothers. So I'm really excited to dig into this with you.
I'm excited too. Thank you. Yeah, it can be very overwhelming because we're so vulnerable
Yes.
during that stage, especially pregnant and postpartum. And then we also have to figure out these really complex regulations. It's not really fair to put on mothers. So that's why I'm here to help navigate all of these complex systems.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's not fair. Like, how are we supposed to figure all of this out? And I personally, as a therapist, I'm talking to my clients a lot about, when they're preparing for leave and when they're coming back to work. And some of the frustrations that I hear about are that they can talk to five different people in the HR department and get five different responses on how they're supposed to do this thing, and it like the people in the system don't even have it all straight. So how are moms supposed to navigate this, let alone dads and families as well?
That's true. And this actually brings us to the first issue, which is that HR may not actually know
Mm,
what your rights are and may not actually teach you how to actually set yourself up for success because
mm,
HR in the end is paid by your employer and they are incentivized to protect the employer, which means that by helping you too much, they can actually go against the employer's interest and then they may actually lose their jobs. So what
Mm.
I see with mothers is that there's this assumption that HR is there to help them and protect them and help them figure it out when that's not really HR's job.
Wow.
In the end, we have to protect our own job and we have to protect our own health and our own baby.
Mm.
Now, it's not easy because it does require you to take a more proactive approach towards
Right.
your own rights,
Right.
and also to be really proactive in these different systems because that's the reality is we're facing the employer, we're facing usually a healthcare system, sometimes a benefit system or an insurance system. So there's so many different systems where we need to deploy different levels of advocacy. So I'm always interested in how do we navigate these systems more easily and
Mhm.
less stressed out and be more prepared
Mhm.
and more careful also to protect ourselves.
I thought this idea that HR is there to protect the employer, that has to be a misconception across the board. Um,
Right. And it doesn't mean that that there's no good HR professionals,
right.
that HR as a whole isn't there to help the employee, and many of them are. But the reason I have a job
Mm.
is because there is a disconnect with HR. And also, we have to keep in mind that most HR professionals are not employment lawyers, they're not even legally trained. Most of them are not, some of them have a certain training or certificate, but none of them went through actual law school and became an employment lawyer, which is the level that I'm operating at. So when I'm communicating with someone in HR, there's usually a very big knowledge gap.
Mm.
And instead, we're assuming that HR has the level of expertise that an employment lawyer would. And it's not really reasonable, especially because they have to do a lot of other things like
Right.
payroll and benefits, sometimes organizing the office luncheon. And the history of HR is that it was actually an admin support role
Mm.
that just got more and more responsibilities. It's actually a very hard job to do
Yeah.
it right.
Right.
So just being very realistic in the sense that HR is not going to be the locus of education that we would require. And also is not going to always be there to really help us because, again, they would be going against our own employers. And often they just don't know because the laws change all the time and it's very confusing.
Wow, that's another really great point. With the I don't know how frequently laws change, but there's always something, some bill or something that's coming up, and I'm sure muddies the waters a little bit. Like if something changes at a high, like government level, it must take forever for it to get down to the point where people who are implementing those laws are actually doing it. I would hope so, as the law says to do it.
Right, especially when it comes to something like leave rights and
Mm.
benefits programs, they're all different across different states. So unlike something like sexual harassment, which is like don't be a perv at work, it's quite simple, or
Right.
equal pay, like don't pay women less. Like these are very
Yeah.
basic, simple principles that we all know and understand. But when you have a mother in a state like California and one in Alabama, and you have a remote worker in Washington, and they all have different benefits programs and systems.
Right.
Um, we're kind of expecting them to understand all of these little intricacies.
Mhm.
Maternity law is very complicated. It is very complex, and it is just not something that can be categorized in one kind of general statement. So the best thing we can do is really understand what our own rights are in the state that we live.
Mm. Um, right. So there's the national laws for maternity rights, I assume are very few.
Yes, yes. So, and this is usually how the conversation goes regarding maternity leave in the US. We say there isn't a lot of it or there isn't any of it, right? Especially paid leave. I mean,
Mm.
this is something we hear a
Yeah.
lot. There's no paid leave in the US. It's like
Right.
us and like Papua New Guinea, one of those countries, a few island nations, and cue the outrage, which I agree with. And we're pushing really hard for federal paid leave, and this is a both and. Um, the employment systems, when it comes to benefits, are actually operated at the state level
Mm.
right now.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about the U.S. doesn't have paid leave, really the truth is that 30 to 40% of Americans do have paid leave. if you're lucky to live in one of the paid leave states, and there's 13 plus DC paid leave states, more and more are rolling out.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of assuming that you don't have paid leave, which is what a lot of mothers do because they live in America, you actually have to look at whether your state provides paid leave. And also, instead of comparing the US to countries like Sweden, which we will never be Sweden, we have to actually look at what are the states doing and how can we create harmonization across the states. Because right now we have such huge differences. You know, a mother in Mississippi is going to have a very different maternity leave than a mother in the state of California. There's there's almost more of a difference between the mother in Mississippi and the mother in California than the mother in California and the mother in Sweden. Um, California is like closer to Europe than it is to some of the conservative states. Same with Massachusetts, Washington, New Jersey. There's a few real big outliers that have these robust benefit systems, but parents aren't really using them. They don't really know. And it's really important when we're thinking about where do we want to look at our family, where do we want to look for a house, that we really know what the states are doing right now to protect families and support families.
Uh, how would somebody do that? Or what what do they look what do
Yeah.
you look for if you're looking for that information?
Yeah. So I have a program centered around all of these rights and benefits because people had a hard time figuring it out because you're looking on different government websites, but the
Right.
government websites do provide information, but it's often unclear how to put it together. And but it's important that you understand just your benefit system because you're paying into it. So if you live in a paid leave state, you're going to be paying
Mhm.
into the system, and you want to know where your money goes. You want to know what you also can get back from it.
Right.
Usually, it's going to be in the form of disability benefits and then some sort of paid leave benefits for family leave. And this is the same for the dads or same-sex moms or just the non-birthing parents. Is that they usually have some sort of parental leave rights, bonding leave rights that they don't know about,
Mhm.
including benefits if they live in a state that has those benefits. So we always just want to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to our leave rights. And
Mhm.
this is also why going to your employer and HR may not really be helpful because your employer actually doesn't pay those benefits to you. Your government does. So when you go to your employer and you say, "How do I get paid leave?" They may not even know because
Mhm.
they are not the benefit system. So
Right.
I find that a lot of parents are going to the wrong place to ask for their benefits, and they're kind of approaching it uh, up in the upside down.
Yeah.
They start with asking their employer, what is the maternity leave policy? Which, in and of itself, this question is not very helpful because
Mhm.
maternity leave doesn't actually exist in the sense that the rights that we have are either a medical leave or a family leave. So if you
Uh-huh.
ask for maternity leave, which is kind of a colloquial term, the
Mhm.
employer doesn't always know what to do with that.
Right.
And then when the employer says, "Oh, we don't offer paid leave policy," the employee's like, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" But it's actually the wrong question to ask. So again, very complicated,
Yeah.
and I don't want to add to the confusion. What I can say is that it's possible to figure it out.
Mhm.
It is possible to kind of move through knowing where you stand, but really understanding that this is highly localized and that we don't want to assume that we have no options just because we are American mothers.
Mhm.
We really have to look at our individual situation, which is going to be very different than a mother that may be very different than our best friend. So there's just all of these nuances and intricacies that we need to be looking out for.
Yeah, you are reminding me of somebody that I worked with who was like very adept at like finding this information out and gathered enough information to teach the HR and tell the HR where to go to find the information because she was one of a few women in this type of work or company, and she was able to advocate for herself enough to get the time that was allotted to her, the time that she could have. Um,
Yes.
so right,
Yeah, this
once
is
you're armed with
common.
info.
Yeah, and this is what I teach my moms to do is I have them actually print out the laws and go to their HR and educate their HR, educate their manager, their employer.
Mm.
We have to keep in mind that folks are really busy, and we have to assume good intent. Um, and that when you go to them to explain something and you show them the law, they will usually respect that. In fact, you can frame it as, I'm here to help keep you compliant, which is an incredible benefit to the employer. When you
Mhm.
can showcase that they had a blind spot, they actually assumed that they were doing something right and they weren't. And you
Sure.
can say, look, this is a massive risk. It's a financial risk. You don't want to get sued. So if you can go to them and show, look, I researched this. This is something I found out. Let's talk about it in a collaborative way. You can position yourself as someone that is looking out for the employer's best interests. And you can become kind of indispensable in that way. So sometimes advocacy can actually become part of your career advancement.
Mm.
It can be something that you offer as an asset to the company.
Right.
So yeah, so I really like to remind mothers that they don't have to approach this in a way that's antagonistic, in a way that is scary
Right.
of like,
Right.
oh, if I ask for this, I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah.
To which I say, the companies tend to be a lot more scared of the moms than the moms are scared of the employers. Now, of course, moms get fired, and that's why I have a law firm oriented towards helping those moms. But at the same time, what I see is we have a lot of power in the workplace during and after pregnancy. We
Mhm.
have all of these rights. Employers have to respect them. They can be a little bit nervous about it. And going and ask for your rights, it's really just asking your employer to follow the rules of the road. It's just like asking
Right.
someone to stop at a red light.
Uh-huh.
Like there's rules we all have to respect, whether they like it or not, whether it causes hardship or not.
Mhm.
Um, it's just to the protection of everyone, including the most vulnerable, which can be the mothers at that time. So just something
Mhm.
to keep in mind is that we don't have to assume things will go poorly, that we will be out of a job. Like we should actually assume that things will be just fine.
Right. Well, that is really empowering. Right, because then it's such a confusing system. You're not going to assume that it's kind of okay to do that or that you can or should do that for yourself. And that brings up a couple of questions for me. At what point would you start this process? Not just looking, well, I guess for sure looking into your own rights, but start the process with your company.
Yeah. So this is as soon as possible. In fact, as soon as you find out you're pregnant,
Mm,
a lot of moms wait.
yeah.
And I really advocate against that. I believe that the moment you know you're pregnant, or even before, is when the advocacy starts. It's no longer about us. It's no longer. It's about our babies, and
Mhm.
they're going to really need us to take that seriously. And you'll never regret advocating for your baby, especially if you
Right.
start early.
Yeah.
What I see happen is that moms are pushing through morning sickness, they're working
Mhm.
through morning sickness.
Yep.
When we have protections around that, you can ask for accommodation rights, you can ask to work from home, you can ask to work a flex schedule, you can ask to be excused from the morning brutal 8 a.m. start time. There's all of these protections and rights that you have under accommodation law that are specifically designed to make it easier for you to do your job and not push through your pregnancy.
Mm.
But what do we do when we wait to announce our pregnancies? We forfeit all of those rights. And instead, we actually punish ourselves
Oof.
by making it hard on ourselves and we don't respect our own limitations. Often we think that we're going to
Mm.
wait because we want to make sure the pregnancy is secure. And by doing that, again, if we don't announce our pregnancy, we are really making a declaration that if I lose a pregnancy, I'm also going to pretend like nothing happened.
Mm.
And even if we do lose a pregnancy, we want to make sure that we can take some disability leave, we can take some accommodations. But if
Right.
you tell your employer after the fact, it's very confusing for them. It's a
Right.
lot easier to do all of this when your employer knows you're pregnant. In addition, you're only protected from against discrimination if your employer actually knows you're pregnant. So if you're
Wow.
pushing through your pregnancy and you are, let's say, late a lot because of morning sickness, or you are delivering work product late, or it is a little bit sloppy because you're tired, you can be fired for being a bad performer.
Mhm.
And then if you say, well, I'm pregnant, it's a little bit too late for that. The last reason we want to announce our pregnancy early, and I mean like early, is because we want to give our employers a lot of time to prepare for our absence. They
Mhm.
have to maybe train someone, they have to maybe find someone. And when you wait too long, you're making it really hard on your employer. And that
Mm.
actually, in my experience, from what I've seen, in a way, it increases the chances of discrimination and retaliation, because they're like, why did you give us only a few weeks to plan for your months of absence? Like, this is an operational challenge we have to figure out.
Right.
And you really didn't give us enough time. Sometimes they don't trust you anymore. They
Mm.
feel like you were hiding it. So
Oh.
it's really, really tricky when we see mothers hide their pregnancy at work, because I don't see it help anyone.
Mm.
Um, and often the mothers feel uncomfortable disclosing private information at work, but in the end, it does impact your workplace. When you have to
Mm.
take time away from work, there's going to be an impact on your employer, on the organization, on your team. And often when we wait to announce, we're just kind of creating more and more anxiety for ourselves.
Yes.
And the best thing to do is to just tell them what's going on, because it's the truth.
I assume that people hearing that will be surprised. Is that a do you find that a lot
Yeah.
of people are
Yeah,
surprised by this?
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the people
Yeah.
that I've talked with, well, at least, fairly commonly, I hear that they feel like it'll put them at risk if they tell them too early, that, their bosses are gonna think that they're not gonna be able to work, or that they're gonna make assumptions about their performance, and they might, but, this part, what you're saying, that it's actually protective for you, I think it's a big push to do it early.
Right. Now, this risk may be true, but by postponing it, we're increasing the risk. You're going to have to tell them anyway.
Mm.
And by waiting longer and longer, there's actually going to be more of a risk, because the employer is like, well, I really would have liked to know that. And we're forfeiting again, like, all of the protections that we have under the law,
Mhm.
which only come into play when the employer knows that we're pregnant after we gave notice of pregnancy. There's always a risk that we can lose our job, that we can be passed over for a promotion. Um, but that risk exists whether we're pregnant or not. And
Right.
at least if they know you're pregnant and something shady happens to your job, you have recourse. You have really serious power.
Mm.
You can enforce your rights. You can do something about it,
Mhm.
which you don't have when they don't know you're pregnant.
Hmm. Yeah, another like that is super empowering also. You said something that I wanted to understand a little bit more. You said, a disability and accommodations. Are those 2 different things?
There are three rights we have
Mhm.
during and after pregnancy. One is a right to not be discriminated against, so to not be treated adversely because of her or because of our pregnancy or because we had a baby. That is one. That's kind of the one that everyone knows. The second one will be a right to leave of absence, which depends where you live, where you work, how big the employer is. And this is going to be a medical leave or a family leave or both. And a right to a leave of absence is an absolute right. So your employer is not allowed to say, oh, sorry, but we can only give you 4 weeks, or we can only do this during the summer, because it's really inconvenient to us. So it's really important to know for parents that when they ask for their rights under their applicable statutes, that the employer really, the only answer they can give is yes. They're not allowed to negotiate about it. So it's an absolute
Oh,
right. It
wow.
is also a non-discrimination right. So if you ask for the time off and you take the time off, you may not be retaliated against for using that time off, including after you come back. Because after, usually when the woman is pregnant, the employer is a little bit careful, but often when she comes back, that's when they're like, well, now I can treat her poorly again. And that's not true. After
Mm.
you come back from leave, you're still protected from retaliation. The third type of right, the third bucket is accommodation rights.
Mm.
You have to think of this like we think about the ADA, which is that employers have to accommodate you for being pregnant or postpartum. And this is going to be in the form of flexibility, accommodations, more breaks,
Mm.
more time to finish projects,
Mhm.
um, being excused from an office vacation or trip, company travel, um, all sorts of things which are going to depend on your job. An
Mm.
accommodation right is something that does need to be kind of discussed with your employer.
Mm.
So you have to go to them and you have to say, I'm having a really hard time being here at 8 a.m. because I have morning sickness. I would like to start at 9 a.m. And let's say you have a computer job, and all of your job can be done remotely, or you can just stay an hour later, then that should be an easy yes. But let's say you're a teacher and your classes start at 8:15, that's going to be a little bit harder. And then they might say, well, how are we going to do this? And they do have an obligation to figure this out with you.
Mm.
The other accommodation right that exists that I really want to highlight is in the context of postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, or generally postpartum stress or mental health challenges after you have a baby.
Mhm.
So, what a lot of mothers don't know is that you can use these accommodation rights to take more time off. So,
Mhm.
when you reach the end of your leave, often the mothers aren't ready
Mhm.
and they're still stressed out. They're a little bit moody or just depressed. And instead, what they do is they push themselves to go back to work when there is another alternative. They can go to their doctor to get a doctor's note asking to have their leave extended
Mhm.
using their accommodation rights. And that is something that a lot of mothers that I work with do, and they stay on leave for quite a long time.
Mhm.
And so it's something that we can use these accommodation rights for a lot of different purposes. It's quite malleable and creative and flexible, and it's intentionally designed that way. It's intentionally designed to keep mothers employed.
Yeah, I have a question about that. So I, as a psychologist, I'm able in the state of California to extend my clients' leave for anxiety and depression, all of those things. Um, and I'm when I'm filling out disability forms, I have to sort of not prove, but show that there's a reason that it should be extended. Now, is that different? Is it like a medical leave different than an accommodation?
So medical leave can be a form of an accommodation.
Ah, okay.
So when you're asking to extend it, you're saying what this mother needs to accommodate her restrictions, her limitations, her mental state is more time at home.
Mhm.
That is the accommodation that we're seeking. So it just is one of the types. Or you can
Got it.
say what this mother needs to accommodate her mental health is to work remotely, or it's to return to work part time.
Mhm.
So it's just one of the forms of an accommodation.
Got it.
And this is going to depend on the mother's job, on the willingness by the employer to work with her, and
Mhm.
also just on her own appetite to, like work and to kind of ease back into work.
Great, thank you for that. Another question I have from people is that when they're on their family leave, maternity leave, pregnancy, whatever leave they're calling it for this period of time, is that sometimes they have employers reaching out to them, asking them questions, when are you going to come
Mhm.
back, and stuff like that. And it gets a little murky for them about what kind of communication should they or should they not be having
Yeah,
with their
it's a good one.
employer, or should their employer even be asking them these questions?
Yes. So when are you going to come back should not even be a question that's being asked, because we have to make sure that we are getting our leave plans confirmed. So when we're in the position where our employers don't know when we're going to come back, that's a really risky place to be
Mhm,
legally, because
mhm,
that means that we don't have a confirmed leave plan. Anytime we're going to ask for our leave, we're going to give them a specific time window of like, this is when I'm taking this leave, please confirm. And then you get that confirmation, and then they know when you'll come back. Then when you need more time off, you need to provide them with a specific return date, even if you don't know, like, if you'll be ready. You do actually have to say, I'm
mhm,
asking for another 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and then extend as needed. But what we don't want to do is leave our employer guessing when we're going to be coming back, because then we can be held to be forfeited our jobs,
mhm,
actually. An
mhm.
employer doesn't have to accommodate an infinite leave. So
Right.
it's very important when we ask for more time that we declare to our employers, like, this is when I plan to come back. And yes, employees are expected to communicate with their employers about the nature and duration of their leave, including providing medical notes and anything that helps the employer understand their labor shortages.
Mhm.
Um, Keeping an employer guessing as to when we come back, again, it can lead to job loss.
Right.
So the employer is not allowed to ask us for work. So they're not allowed to ask employees when they're on leave, hey, I know you're on leave, but we have this project, we have this launch. Can you just jump on email real quick? Just a really quick Zoom. It won't be quick, but we don't have anyone else who can do the design of this website.
Mm.
So you really need to help us out here. I feel like we've been generous towards you, so you need to do this for us real quick. They're not allowed to do that.
Right.
They are allowed to do, hey, we have a launch. You're the only one who worked on this, but your Google Drive folder is locked. Can you please send over all of your deliverables and your files to this person so that we can get moving on this project?
Mm.
They're allowed to ask you for things that we call de minimis. So a password, forwarding an email, finding something that a client sent, something that only you can do that doesn't really require like mental labor or actual output or work. So they are allowed to ask you to just help keep the operations going in a way. So those are the two distinctions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right. So then when people are preparing to return to go back to work, how do you support them to figure that out?
Yeah, just to keep in mind that you still have rights when you return to work. So just because you may have run out of your leave right and you already uh, took maybe a pregnancy accommodation, even when you're postpartum, you're still in a protected class. So you can still ask for things that you need. It's not like you exhausted all of your rights. In fact, returning to work is the hardest part, in my opinion. In my experience, returning to work postpartum was much harder than actually being on leave or working while pregnant.
Mhm.
Not That's not the same for everyone, but that was how I experienced my motherhood journey.
Mhm.
So just really still leaning into your rights at the time and understanding your pumping rights, being very also early with your notice to pump. In fact,
Mm.
I have the mothers I work with give notice of that during pregnancy. What I see a lot of moms do is like they have to go to work on Monday and then they're like, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to pump." And the employer is like, "Well, we don't really have a space for that." And the employer and the mom is like, "Well, legally I have a right to pump in a space." And it can cause some tension, it can cause some
Right.
frustration. So I have moms tell their employers that they intend to return as a lactating mother if it all goes right.
Mhm.
And I have them tell their employers that when they plan for their maternity leave.
Mm.
And then I have them confirm that a few weeks before they actually return to work. So even though we have rights in the workplace, we have to keep in mind that from our employer's perspective, they do have to make some changes
Right.
to make sure they can accommodate those needs.
Mhm.
So having a space to pump, it is an operational uh, challenge they have to figure out. Um, and sometimes they have to order, for example, blinds, and it can take a couple of weeks. Um, or they have to move things out of a little office, and it can take some time. So we want to give notice of our pumping rights early,
Mhm.
and then anything else that we may need
Mhm.
that would help us return to work and to feel supported while we return to work. Yeah.
Yeah, that exact scenario. I've heard quite a few times the pumping challenge, and I mean, I think it's also harder depending on the type of job you have. Like if you're, I don't know, a nurse versus
Yeah.
somebody who has a desk job and has some more
Yes.
flexibility with time. Um, there's going to be different challenges uh, there for
Yeah.
sure.
Truly, it's such an injustice with nurses and teachers. They're having a really hard time pumping when
Hmm.
they should be the most supported, I believe,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
especially when you're a teacher that's teaching other children, right? Like we should
Right.
be really supporting your motherhood journey the most. And I just want to tell women who are in those industries to stand really firm. It is not an excuse for your employer to say, "Yeah, like it's hard with our job to." Give you time and space. Like they actually have to find more staffing. They just have to figure it out. Like it is
Hmm.
just not your problem.
Hmm.
That it's harder when you are in education or in healthcare. Um, they have to find a sub when you're a teacher, and they have to give you, or they have to shuffle around your classes.
Hmm.
Same with if you're a nurse, they have to provide more staffing. They have to give you the breaks. There's really the employer is not allowed to negotiate about that.
I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a tough one.
it's tough.
That's a tough one. I think especially with if I mean, if we're adding in just some of the way that what kind of women are socialized into this, that like, oh, we've been
Hmm.
gone so long. I don't want to be a
Yeah,
burden. Oh, I'm asking for
right.
too much, and all this other
Yeah, I get that.
stuff that is playing out. Like having this information is part of knowing your rights, feeling empowered, knowing that you can ask for it, and that's just what needs to happen, as opposed to
Yeah.
like, I'm doing too much, I'm asking for too
Yes,
much.
and this is just the rights that we have that we're using. Companies feel no shame using rights that they have. They feel no shame using every and all tax deduction, tax loophole, anything they can get away with. Like they would not even wait a day if there's a vendor that's late with deliverables. They would not wait a day to sue them for breach of contract. Like in the business world, there's no shame when it comes to our rights and when it comes to
Mhm,
enforcing our needs.
mhm,
But of course, like we as women and as employees, we've been really socialized to feel shame, to feel guilt, which is wild because our employers are not victims. They are well resourced, large, usually large operational
mhm. Mhm.
structures that can handle a punch.
Yeah,
And here
absolutely.
you are creating life. So, absolutely do not feel shame and guilt for asking for what you need. And what I also like to tell moms is that you don't know if you're going to be at that job next year or in 2 years or in 5 years. Like
Right.
jobs kind of come and go, but your motherhood experience is sacred. It is urgent. It is imminent. It is happening now. And you don't want to look back on it with regrets. I can't tell you how many moms I've talked to who cut short their breastfeeding journey, who went back to work early, including myself.
Mhm,
And like I have deep regret over
mhm,
returning to work the way that I did. And I'm not even at that job anymore.
mhm,
Like I
mm,
don't talk to any of those people.
mhm.
I think it can feel like our job is really, really important. Um, and that we have to center it. And that's part of the motherhood initiation. There's going to be reshuffling where suddenly you see, okay, wow, okay, my baby, okay, my body, okay, me, okay, my
Mhm.
family, okay, my needs actually come first. And it's important that we practice that. We have to practice that muscle.
Definitely. Oh, that's really important. So there are quite a few people who have their own business and who don't have this structure of corporate HR, that kind of thing, and are having to navigate the system on their own. Um, I mean, I know this is like a huge topic probably to dive into, but if what do you how do you support those people who don't have the HR system and all that?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit about my experience when I left the firm. It took me a long time to leave because I was very attached to the infrastructure. I felt really comfortable and I was really worried about creating infrastructure for myself,
Mhm.
and I was uh, so used to a lot of things being provided. Like I was used to there being printer paper, and then I'm like, oh, do I really? Am I going to go to Costco to buy printer paper for myself? But in
Right.
the end, I actually have never used printer paper ever since. But there is just a lot of mental obstacles I found, and also, and this is less for me than most mothers around business formations, around taxation, around regulatory requirements. Like a business license and all of that upkeep. It can feel really overwhelming. And what I
Yeah.
found, there's a lot of spaces online that do like business coaching and like start your own business and like
Mhm.
have the time freedom, and none of those places are really teaching you actually how to form a business, how to
Mm.
actually run a business on the back end.
Mm.
It's a lot about, from in what I see, it's a lot about like your abundance mindset, but like the IRS doesn't care about that. So
Right.
what I like to support moms with is the actual, like what it actually takes to run the business. And this is more of the boring stuff, right? Like the
Mhm.
legal stuff,
Mm.
but it's often what is actually standing in the way of mothers actually launching their own business.
Yeah.
Um, it can be great to have a desire for business. It can be great to have an idea, but then you actually have to do the things. Like you
Mhm.
actually have to form a business. And there's a few mistakes I see a lot of moms make. A lot of moms are still working as independent contractors and they're not actually doing the work to incorporate themselves,
Mhm.
which they're going to lose out on a lot of money because they have to pay those self-employment taxes. So
Right.
easy things like incorporating yourself and then putting yourself on payroll. Those are like that's something that really needs to be done if you want to protect yourself also liability wise,
Right.
and pay less in taxes. And also if you do live in a paid leave state and you put yourself on payroll, you're actually an employee of your company, and
Mhm.
then you can get benefits. So if you then have another baby, you can go on paid leave like through your own company. How cool
Mhm.
is that? And there's just a lot of moms who aren't doing that. So that's like the most essential one is the business formation. Like make sure you incorporate yourself, make sure that you hire yourself as an employee of your company. Secondly, if you are going to start working with people, make sure you're not accidentally misclassifying people. You really need super good agreements. You need to ask people for their business license when you work with them. You
Mhm.
have to make sure that you don't give them a schedule. You have to make sure that you don't control their work. Because if you do, especially in a state like California, they're very strict about it. Um, you're going to be held to be their employer. And then if you get audited, you're actually going to owe a ton of payroll taxes and penalties. So you just have to be super careful when you work with someone, because even if they don't feel like they're your employee, the state can actually do an independent audit of you and make a determination that you have uh, misclassified someone. The rules about that are really strict. And what I see is everyone just kind of assuming that we're fine and we're contractors and we have an agreement when that's really not enough. You really have to protect yourself as a business owner. Um, and then there's a few hacks. Like you can, you have children that you can do little things for you, or they're on your website, you can pay them and pay into a Roth, which is also a business deduction. And then I also see that women don't fully understand taxation and how to run those business deductions. So it's really the world of business uh, ownership and being an entrepreneur. It's very interesting and it's really exciting. But there's no one really teaching you how to do it. No one's really
Right.
teaching you how to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people are teaching you like how to, again, like have abundance mindset. But I just
Right.
find that we have to make sure we actually support mothers in the most tangible sense,
Right.
so that they don't put themselves at risk.
Ah, gosh. I feel like people will I would have a lot of questions about this and how to do it and that I mean that you're absolutely right. At least what I see on social media is a lot about the abundance mindset, which is great.
Yeah,
But
it's great.
but yeah,
Yeah, but
there's
it's
so much
serious. Owning a
mhm,
business is serious. Like
mhm,
we just because it's easy to do in a sense of like you can own a company doesn't mean it's easy to actually run a company.
mhm,
Now it's easy. It's not hard to figure out. Like these are things that are all figure outable, but someone just has to explain it to you once.
mm,
And I just find an incredible gap there, with when it comes to like the actual knowledge, tangible knowledge on how to run a business.
mhm.
So
Um,
that's something that I've also started doing recently is just share some of that information.
and that I mean that you are an incredible resource. And does it vary? I assume it varies by state. So this would
The
be like another thing
Yeah,
for
so
somebody who's
yeah,
employing themselves would have to figure out their state's whatever.
yes, yes, and again, you actually have to have some understanding on your state employment law if you're going to be an employee of your own business. Um, Same if you're going to have a nanny, if you're going to have a childcare provider, like understand you need to understand employment law because you're going to be an employer. Um, and so yeah, there's it's just an up leveling. Like you have to
Mhm.
make sure that you know the realm where you're navigating. And there's rules. There's
Yeah.
still rules, even if we think we're fully free as business owners. There's still a lot of rules that we need to be taking into account.
So I this would be a lot for somebody to try and figure out on their own. They're just, if they're just going into the becoming a mom or having a role transition or whatever, all the things we've talked about. It could be overwhelming to think like, okay, now I got to figure all this stuff out. So you are providing some of this support yourself.
Yes.
This is a
Yes.
service you provide.
Yeah.
And what is entailed there? I guess just briefly, I know it's available on your website, but how do you help you help people?
So I've been doing it through consultations, mainly, and I'm going to be doing a group program, also where I just teach this on a bit of a bigger scale.
Mm.
So that's something to look out for as well.
Yeah, that's great because I mean, this is so needed. And as far as I understand, there aren't that many people doing specifically what you're doing. Yes, employment law, but really honing in on what moms need to have their to have what they need to feel empowered and understand their
Yeah.
rights.
And for the employees, I have a whole program, when you're like, what it does my state say about my leave rights? Like, you don't have to do that research. I have it all laid out. I have it all figured out. I have it all planned out in terms of what you should say to your employer, including the actual email that you want to send.
Oh,
Um,
like a
so
template.
yes,
Even less
yeah. So
thinking to
just
have to
copy
do. I
paste.
love that. Making it as easy as
You just
possible.
copy paste it into your employer. And you can also ask me questions there in the membership. So that's something that I provide as well.
That's amazing. I mean, you are filling such a huge and need a gap, and people are rightly so really drawn to the content you provide and the work that you're doing because the need is so big, and because it's relatable how you present stuff and you make it fun and all that,
Thank
especially
you.
on
I
social
try.
media.
I try to make the law less boring.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah. The rest of us would be asleep for sure.
Yeah.
Just so, anyways, thank you so much.
I think I'll just say that as mothers, we're creating life, and you can create your own life in the business world too. Like there's endless opportunities. And especially now that we have so much more remote work accommodations, there's just a lot more that we can do in the in between. It's no longer like you're either a stay at home mom or you never see your kids. Like there's just a lot in the in between. And embracing the nuance, I find to be essential here. And also trusting that our careers are long and we have a lot of time to do all the things we want to
Oof, this is gold. Thank you so
do.
much.
You're
It's
welcome.
so good. It's so good. Thanks for taking the time to share all of this with us and the work that you're doing. It's just amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you're welcome.
Please go connect with Daphne on social media at the Mama Attorney, or you can go to her website, themamaattorney.com. You heard her talk a little bit about a service that she's offering, a group that she's offering that's going to start pre sale in January of 2025. So please do go check out her website and check back in so you can find information on that resource. And of course, if you haven't yet followed or subscribed to the Mom and Mind podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, go on over and do that. And please, please, please leave a review so that other people can know what you think about this information and about this resource to know that it is a good fit for them as well. I thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.